Join me for a conversation with game designer, spiritual director, and Rabbi, Menachem Cohen.
Welcome to DiceGeeks.com Tabletop RPG Show. Level up your RPG campaigns by filling yourself with stories and knowledge. Explore topics from archaeology to film history to writing to literature and much, much more. This is DiceGeeks.com Tabletop RPG Show.
Welcome to the show. My name is Matt, and I am your host. This is the podcast where we learn how to become better game masters and role players by filling ourselves with stories and knowledge. Okay, guys, I have an awesome interview coming up like always. However, first, if you could like, rate, review, or subscribe to the podcast in your favorite podcast player, app, whatever, that would be simply amazing and would be greatly appreciated. Those things just really help out the show immensely, and I could use your help. Also, if you want to check out my books and Game Master resources, you can do so at Amazon.com, DriveThruRPG.com, or DiceGeeks.com. All you have to do is search for Dice Geeks, all one word, and you will find some of my awesome resources. Or you can type in the Book of Random Tables into Google, and you will find them. All right, enough of all that stuff. Here's the interview. My guest today is spiritual director, rabbi, and game designer, Menachem Cohen. Menachem, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Great to be here.
No problem. It's my pleasure. So, Menachem, first-time guest, I always ask them, how did you first discover tabletop role-playing games?
I think it was 1979, and my friend Chris brought over the red box of the basic D&D set, and we made up some characters. I still have my first character, and we started playing, and then I asked for the set for Hanukkah or my birthday and played with my younger brother. And I've been playing pretty regularly ever since. Not just D&D, lots of games. I played Champions for a long time in middle school and high school. I played all the indie games from Wander Home to Thirsty Sword Lesbians and other Powered by the Apocalypse games. And I have a full shelf. I have a good, bad Kickstarter habit when I keep backing games.
Yeah, a lot of people in the game community have a problem with Kickstarter, as in we love to back so many awesome games.
We love to support our compatriots.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, this is interesting because, I first played D&D in 1982. My older brother's friend introduced us to the game, and I haven't looked back since. Just been playing and that. So it is interesting that you kind of discovered, Dungeons and Dragons kind of at that period. What do you think it was that just kind of captured your imagination and that you just kept playing?
I was already reading lots of comic books. I was a DC kid. The Legion of Superheroes was and is my favorite title. So I was already prepped for that. I read Lamort D'Arthur in the modern English before then and other fantasy novels. So I was already prepped and ready for that world. And the idea of just getting to create these characters and not just read them on a page or watch them on TV was just so invigorating.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's what kind of caught me as well, that I could actually kind of embody that character and then, act as they would and make those decisions that the hero was making, right?
Yeah, and give them personalities and quirks and background stories that were not always tragic, and just to play out and explore different ways of being in the world.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Now, you said that you have your first character still. What was that character's name?
I believe it was, I'd have to go look at it. It was a rogue thief.
Oh, okay.
And it was human. And the name doesn't stick with me so much.
Okay.
The funny memory I have is that no one knew what a Morning Star was. My friend thought it was a box of 6 knives in it.
Oh.
It later became one of my favorite weapons when I learned about the ball and chain and the spikes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's interesting. I just thought that was kind of cool that you had your first character because a few years ago, After my father had passed away, we were cleaning out the house and the old house, and back in a closet, I found my character sheets like stuck in kind of a magazine holder in the old kind of red cover book with the 3 hole punches and the green dragon and the sorceress and that on the cover, or the magic user, I should say. And I found my characters. My first character when I was 9 years old, he was called the Skull. And he was a human fighter. And so I scanned all of my characters in and I put them on my website. So anybody can see those at dicegeeks.com.
Awesome.
Yeah. It was a lot of fun. It really brought back a ton of memories, seeing a lot of those characters that I had played and some of the different sessions that we had ran through. And of course, we never followed any of the rules. I mean, that's just a given. I mean, we were just kind of going crazy and doing whatever we wanted to do.
I just recently found about half a dozen old Dragon magazines from the era, and including the one with the original Barbarian by Gygax. And that was one of my favorite characters for a while, to play the character class.
Yeah. That's awesome. I mean, those might be worth some money.
If they had covers, maybe.
Oh no, the covers are gone. Yeah, the covers were so awesome.
They were beautiful.
Right. Oh my gosh. I remember one that was like themed after, I think, like samurai and that. And it was just an amazing cover. I think it was by Larry Elmore. That was just this kind of Japanese kind of themed samurai. And he was holding this staff or some kind of weapon, and just the detail on the staff just blew me away. Just such great art in those books or in magazines. Just kind of amazing stuff. And now you said you kind of went on from Dungeons and Dragons and you've played tons of other games. I haven't really had, I don't think, anybody on the podcast to talk about Powered by Apocalypse games. Maybe just a little bit, we can talk about that for just a couple minutes. What kind of, maybe just set up Powered by Apocalypse a little bit, and then kind of describe, kind of the appeal of that system to you.
Sure. I think instead of classes, we have playbooks in Powered by the Apocalypse games, as well as in Belonging Outside Belonging games, which are a hack on Powered by the Apocalypse, but without a game master. So you have a playbook that has different moves, and every action you take, you find a way to fit into one of your moves. And the game leaves a lot of room for character agency, player agency, to kind of, with the game master, kind of invent the way things work. Because the moves, if you have 7 or 8 moves to do everything that you're going to do in the game, you have to invent and be creative in the use of those moves. So I really enjoy doing it that way. And you can have any setting or any system you want, right? You can go from space to dungeon crawls to internal games about being talking animals. Yeah, absolutely. And my kind of experience is a little bit limited with the Powered by Apocalypse. I've recently gotten into Iron Sworn Starforged, a new Kickstarter, which I had to back, of course, as we mentioned. And I do find the system, quite interesting, and the idea of moves. Just kind of thinking about that, you did mention that, these systems usually don't have a game master. Well, there's Powered by the Apocalypse do have game masters. Belonging Outside Belonging doesn't have game masters. Yeah. And then the Iron Sworn can or doesn't have to, that you can play without a game master. I always found that interesting because, thinking back to the early days in the 80s, right? If I introduced my friends to role playing, of course I was the game master. And then there is always the problem sometimes of, saying, hey, look,
we could play today. Who wants to run a game? And nobody does, right?
So belonging outside belonging games like Dream Askew, Dream Apart, you can just pick it up and play with no preparation.
Yeah.
There's lots of world building that goes on along with character creation. So you build the whole setting together as a group, and it could take a couple hours sometimes, but it can also take 30 minutes in some games.
Yeah, and I think that's a really interesting kind of innovation in tabletop role-playing games. This kind of co-op or collaborative. I mean, it's always been collaborative storytelling, but we've really swung to the far side, right? And we are really making it collaborative these days. Wouldn't you agree?
Oh, there's so many wonderful ways in which a lot of the games I play, when you're making your character, there's a section where it says, okay, ask the person to your left one of these questions. Ask the person to your right one of these questions. And they're questions like, what do I know about you? Or what do you know about me that no one else knows? How did I embarrass you publicly in the past? So you build this lore together with the players.
Yeah.
And if you have a game master, then the game master gets all these juicy tidbits to build in. Yes,
absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that, sadly, that took me kind of a long time. Of course, we were, I was at the beginning kind of the hobby, and then I didn't have too many examples, right? I had like one dungeon master, and then I was running every game, right? Like, so I didn't have many examples. But it took me, a long time to figure out that I could just ask my players certain things, or have the players ask themselves, how do you know each other? Know, and it's silly kind of looking back that it took me like, 10 years or 15 years of role playing to get to the point to where I could just ask my players, oh, well, how do your characters know each other? And it solves so many problems. It just solves so many problems. But I think it was just the nature of the hobby being so new, right? And compared to, other hobbies. I mean, we're coming up, barely 50 years of role playing.
Well, GMs and DMs, it was like they had the power, right? That was the way it worked for, and you had to be afraid. I still like sweating during my games, where I don't know what's going to happen. Yeah. But it's the way of the roles have shifted in that way, that it's more collaborative, and the game master is often considered another player instead of this totally different role. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And we had to work that out, right? We had to kind of experiment and work that out, because that was certainly the case for a long time, that it was kind of expected that the game master had pretty much everything about the setting kind of just nailed down. Yeah, and you're writing a movie script or something. Yep. And the characters were there to kind of interact with those things, but there was no, if you're fighting the big boss in a chamber, there was nothing like a player who could say something like, oh, is there like a big rock over here that I can hide behind? The game master's like, no. I know exactly what this chamber looks like. You can't do that. But now, obviously, today's games, we really allow that freedom, even in Dungeons and Dragons, that where if a player comes up with something kind of on the fly, that we just add it into the setting as well. My friend Julian Jackson calls it the Chandelier Rule. If you think it'd be great for your character to swing on a chandelier into the scene, he'll put a chandelier in if it's at all possible. Oh, that's great. Now, I hadn't heard of that one. So that is really cool. Yes, because the old kind of swashbuckling hero would enter the room swinging on a chandelier and sword fighting, right? I especially love these things that have flavor, but don't necessarily change the mechanical outcomes. Mm-hmm. Just add spice to the game. Yeah. Yeah. And absolutely. And, looking back on it, I guess, you think like
Now, I've talked about it on the podcast before. Obviously, I've been running games since I was 9 years old, and I have made every mistake when I was running a game, right? Like I've been a jerk. I've been too passive. I've been too easy. I've been too hard. I've introduced my own characters that were the star of the show. I've forced players to do, like certain plot, hooks that I've only wanted. I've made every mistake. And it's from doing that, it's given me more experience, but so I can look back on the mistakes and look at also the times that I had successes, right? The times that I did things that were really good. And, some of these things, that we used to do, like, not allowing a character to ask if there's a chandelier, in the room or something. It's just kind of boggles my mind that was ever the case.
Yeah, I'm glad we're at where we're at with all that.
Yeah. And definitely the hobby has evolved quite a bit. But I really like that Chandelier Rule because it doesn't like give your players, some huge advantage or anything. It just allows them to do something that's cool and fun.
Rule of cool, as some people call it.
Yeah. And I have definitely heard of the rule of cool. We've talked about that quite a bit on the podcast, that if it's cool, let somebody do it, right? Or let it happen.
Say yes. Yeah, it's
yes.
Improv rule. Yes, and.
Yeah. Yes. And yes, there is a chandelier and you can swing from it, and you can also fall off. Give me an acrobatics check.
Yeah. There could be a consequence.
Yeah, absolutely. But I mean, the game is instantly more fun, right?
That reminds me of one thing in Powered by the Apocalypse games and other games. Mm-hmm. You only have 2d6 to roll.
Yeah.
And you roll them every time. And even a low failing roll doesn't always mean you fail.
Mm-hmm.
It means maybe you succeed, but there's a consequence.
Yeah.
Like something, it's like you jump out the window to grab the falling person, but and now that's a bad example. I just watched Shang-Chi, so I was thinking about the window scenes. But yeah, you could succeed, but you where you land is in the pit of vipers.
Yes,
literally or figuratively.
Yes. I think that is another great innovation as well. That it just adds something to the fiction of the game a little bit more, and of course. Like I said, I've had very little experience with Powered by the Apocalypse at this point, but I have played, say, Fantasy Flight's Star Wars a bit, and with their story dice.
Oh yeah.
You can have an amazing success, but have a ton of disadvantages, and you have to, the player has to think of those disadvantages that have just happened. And it is, I don't know. I have had a ton of fun playing that game because, 6 of us sitting around the table, we're all creative. We're all storytellers, right? And I think that's kind of what was lacking when the game master was kind of the ultimate authority. It's just that we missed out that our players were storytellers too.
Yeah, we get to make space as game masters for the players to evolve those stories.
Yeah, absolutely. And as I've kind of gone on in my game mastering and tried to get better at it, I find too that I have a little less, I guess, burnout or frustration with game mastering, as if I'm allowing my players to come up with some things, because then I'm surprised by the setting or the outcomes or the situations, kind of just like they are. So I'm kind of just like, oh, wow, that's cool. I didn't think of that.
Yeah, some beautiful things come up. I was playing Thirsty Sword Lesbians with my child, a friend, and another adult. And we invented together, which I never would have come up with on my own, that the flying ships we had consensus engines that worked better the more the crew of the ship agreed on the plans. And I love this idea that, on a crew that squabbled all the time, they couldn't go as fast or be as maneuverable.
Uh-huh.
But a crew that worked together was a better ship.
Huh, that's interesting. That is a fun concept. And I think things like that just come out of, I mean, whether you're on Zoom or whether you're at the table, just, 5, 6 people who are very creative, just talking about, the setting and the world, just some really awesome things come out of it.
Yeah.
And, I've written a little booklet called the No Prep Game Master. And, I think this is, not only does it make the games better, but I think it takes a ton of pressure off the game master, and it adds that kind of spark of creativity and spontaneity that can keep the game master from feeling like they have to do all the heavy lifting and they know everything and they're just here to, kind of run some numbers and see if people, succeed or fail.
Amen.
Yeah. And, I mean, I could keep going on and on about some of this stuff, but now you have, some kind of interesting element to some of your gaming as well, because I introduced you as a spiritual director, a rabbi, and a game designer. And I kind of want to talk about some of those. So you started playing D&D, back in the day, and then now you've gone on to a whole bunch of different games. Maybe let's start with game designer first.
Sure.
What kind of made you want to make the leap from player to kind of participant in forming rules?
Let's go back to the 90s for that.
Okay.
I was playing a second edition Psionicist named Karen Woodwalker. And the second edition Psionicist was one of my favorite classes ever. And I was talking our way out of all sorts of sticky situations about getting into combat. Mm-hmm. And I was like, that's not me. That's my character. I'm quiet. I'm reserved. Until one day it clicked. Oh, that is me. I'm the one who's like making these speeches, these monologues that convince whoever we're facing not to attack us. There not to be a fight and let us go. So over time, I started learning that people were using games in education, role-playing games in education, and building social skills and executive functioning, and using games in therapeutic settings, particularly in working with young people with autism. There's a lot of great work going on there now with GATE, Gaming Approaches to Education, and Game to Grow with their critical core game that's coming out really soon. And along the way, I'd always been a real spiritually inclined person. And I was ordained a rabbi in 2003. And much of my work would be really, I would say, I'm here to be with people, individuals on their spiritual journeys, one-on-one, small groups. I ended up working on the streets of Chicago, where I live, for 13, 14 years with an agency called the Night Ministry, kind of being there for LGBTQ and our homeless youth. And a lot of what we did was not necessarily signing them up for programs, but it was having what we called a ministry of presence. We would have these intimate conversations in the parking lot where our outreach van would park. And that, again, was me being with people one-on-one on their journeys and supporting them and remembering their names the second time I met them. So putting that all together, I was 47, so I'm 52 now, I'll be 53 in January. And I started asking myself, where do I want my life to be at 50? And I did some meditation and reflection and journaling about it. And I really realized that being with people in this way, one-on-one and in small groups, and also playing role-playing games are like the two passions of my life. Mm-hmm. So I started working to put those together. I started thinking, how can I, knowing what I know about how people use games therapeutically and in education, how can I start using games in education, use games spiritually to help people with their big questions about life, their who am I, why am I here, what is right and wrong, what makes me come alive. And so I started working on how can you do that while playing games, even while playing D&D.
Yeah, very interesting. And I guess, how do you think that playing games can help people answer some of those questions?
So I'm going to get biblical for a moment, but not preachy.
Okay.
There's a story in 2 Samuel chapters 11 and 12 about King David. King David was a very human person. He was on his roof looking out over the city, and he sees Bathsheba bathing on a couple of roofs away, and he decides he wants her. So long story short, he has her husband Uriah sent to the front lines of the battles that are going on with instructions to everybody else to retreat and leave him to be killed, which happens. So he takes Bathsheba into her house, she mourns, and then they get married. It falls upon Nathan the prophet to go tell David what a jerk he is, but he can't just walk in and tell David what a horrible thing he's done and how horrible he is, because he might lose his head. So he walks in and says, "Your Majesty, may I tell you a story?" David, the Psalms are attributed to King David, so he says, "Yes." So Nathan begins. There was a rich man and a poor man. The rich man had lots of cattle and sheep and goats, which is how you measured wealth in those days, one of the main ways you measured wealth. And there was a poor man who had one goat, one ewe. And he loved that goat, lived in the house with him, grew up with his family. And then one day the rich man gets a traveler, a wayfarer, and the tradition was you feed the wayfarer. And he didn't want to slaughter any of his own goats, so he slaughters the poor man's goat. David is incensed at this moment and says, that man should be punished. And Nathan, I always imagine trying not to smile, says, Atah ha'ish, you are the man. David then is able to see the truth, and he tries to repent. I mean, Uriah is dead, so what can you do? But he does his best. But it was that fictional distance of the story that allowed David to keep his ego and defenses down when getting admonished, right? He was able to see the truth because it was just a story. In game design studies and game design, we have this concept called alibi, which says, it's not me, it's my character. So we're able to kind of have that fictional distance where our character is the one exploring, what does it mean to serve? What does it mean to come from a good family? Or what does it mean to go against your parents' wishes? Whatever the issue or question might be, it's just your character, not you. There's also a concept called bleed in game studies, which means that things in your day-to-day life affect the character, and things your character does come back and affect you. So sometimes we play to bleed. We intentionally put things into our characters. We do this unintentionally a lot. And then we can process things about ourselves through the character's actions. So some people, that's called playing to bleed, intentionally doing that. I mean, I think most of us either make our characters like ourselves or the opposite of ourselves without even trying to, right? Especially when we start playing, we don't necessarily always know how to do a different personality for our character. I think my first bunch of characters were a lot like me and how they would behave and respond to things. So what if I bring some intention to this? What if we all bring some intention to this and say, hey, I want to explore something by playing a character? I've done a pretty deep exploration of my gender and what it means to have a gender in this world through characters who were non-binary, characters who were completely covered up so no one knew their gender, characters whose gender went back and forth, during the game. And it's allowed me to really explore the concept of gender and what it means to me to have a gender, for example.
Very interesting. A lot to kind of unpack there.
Yeah, I realize I spoke a long time.
No, that's fine. I mean, you're the guest. I would rather you speak than me yammer all the time. I'm sure listeners get enough of me. They want to hear what the guests have to say. And I did think one thing I will kind of follow up on. I think the idea of fiction or the story in your example that Nathan tells King David that David was able to see his crime when he wasn't able to see it before, but he was able to see it now because it was framed within fiction. I think, of course, that is such a powerful device, right? I mean, we can even go back to, some classic television, say, kind of the original Twilight Zone, right? Giving us stories to give us some distance on, how we were treating different people in our society at the time and how we could look at prejudice, but you couldn't do it outright, right? You had to give some fiction in there so people could see it and see it as wrong before they just made some kind of snap judgment, and shut you down. And I just kind of always find that interesting because there is such power in story.
Oh, yeah. I mean, the X-Men, right?
Yeah.
It's all about racism, but it's not.
Yeah. 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 Because of the mutants and different aspects there. And, and of course, we have tons and tons of other examples as well from, say original Star Trek episodes and, and other television and other movies and other media that really use that fiction to kind of, hold up a mirror and get us to kind of understand something and then reveal that we're actually, we're talking about us and our shortcomings or downright failures or whatever the story is trying to communicate.
A lot of times it works better than a lecture.
Yes.
And then you add interactive play to it, and it just becomes that much more powerful that it's you not just reading it or watching it, it's you speaking it, acting it.
Yeah. Yeah. And that is interesting. And I think you're absolutely right, because we could lecture somebody about what they're doing wrong. And we sometimes have a tendency to, fold our arms and close our ears, but you give somebody a story, and once they're sucked into the story, right, that once they're living in there, and then the reveal comes, they usually can't deny it, right?
It's hard when you love the X-Men and then it clicks that this is about discrimination in the real world. Because you get angry that the X-Men are discriminated against. Yeah. 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 You're like, but he's so cool, or she's so cool. Like, come on.
But yeah, you realize that there is a prejudice there that that it's not rational, right? Because they are actually very heroic and very honorable in most cases, I guess, beings. And it's like, why would you do that? Yeah. Yeah. No. And I think, of course, I'm drawn to role-playing games. I've been playing forever. I just released my first novel in 2021, and
Mazel tov.
Yeah, thanks. And so I love the power of story in this way, right? I love the different things that a story can tell, that it can give, it can allow us to open up. And to really see, I'm just kind of reminded, though, I guess, we can. This is probably an imperfect example. I'm only remembering half of it, but we can still close our eyes to it. But we have to be a little bit more conscious, because I remember, I think it was one of the tyrants, back in the Greek period, maybe of Sicily or something like that. He was watching a play, and of course he has the power of life and death in his hands. So during the middle of the performance, he stands up and he's going to walk out, and the playwright is like, "Oh no, I'm dead." And the playwright is like, "Is everything okay?" And he says, "I will not weep over fiction when I am unmoved by my own cruelty." And I'm forgetting exactly where that example is. I think I read it when I was studying some classical mythology and that, but I always felt that was an interesting case where the person becomes aware of it, but they're still even going to try to deny it. But hopefully that tyrant changed his ways a bit because of that play.
I mean, it was obviously getting into him.
Yes.
But we also, when we're challenged, we dig in, and we throw up all the walls and defenses we can. Mm-hmm. A lot of the time, that's our response to being challenged.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And so, maybe it started him on a path of thinking about what he was doing and how he was acting. And, there's always a time for a first step, right?
Right. So when I do this work, I don't, I run what I call spiritual discovery D&D programs. And I do one-on-one work with using the game Dream Chaser, which I'll talk about later. Mm-hmm. But when I do the games, especially in groups, I'm about to start working at the Broadway Youth Center here in Chicago, where I used to work as part of my previous work to do these spiritual discovery D&D groups. I don't do a lot of tell me about your mother at the game table, right? We do start with a little bit of an opening ritual and some opening questions, and we close with the same kind of ritual, which includes a little meditation and questions and debriefing to step out of the magic circle. But the deepest work gets done one-on-one in between game sessions, because I don't want to put people's stuff in front of the whole group. That's a kind of vulnerability that I don't want to necessarily bring. So the gameplay doesn't necessarily look that different than a game, in your basement.
Okay.
Something you said really sparked me to think about that right now. And just the idea that the work is really can be really deep, and people's defenses can go up. And I want to be able to do that, talk to people one-on-one about what their responses and what their feelings are, as maybe some of their sense of self is being challenged and stretched. I don't want to do that in front of 5 other people.
Yeah. 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 And and obviously I think that's understandable. I think even sometimes, when I introduce, new players, and of course I'm usually just playing a casual game, just with some friends or something, but occasionally, you'll get somebody who will say something like, I'm not comfortable just like acting. Do I have to do a voice this session or something? I don't want to do that, and you're just like, no, you don't have to do that. Something kind of along those lines. So I could definitely see, if your purpose is to kind of dig deeper, I could definitely see where that could, be problematic, especially if you're dealing with, strangers and that. So I think that's an interesting approach, that you kind of keep it kind of casual and then do some other work on, kind of outside the sessions, right?
Yeah. Most of the work I'm talking about is people who sign up knowing what they're getting into.
Sure.
I wouldn't do it just, at a con game.
Yeah.
But I do think people can do this work on their own, and no one else at the table has to know that they're exploring a question or a challenge in their life through their character. They don't have to know. As long as you don't vomit your stuff over everybody on the table, you can just do it and journal about it, think about it, or go back and talk to your therapist or spiritual director later if you want to.
Yeah.
You can explore what is it, maybe you felt powerless most of your life. So you're playing a character of great power, and you can think about what that means for you in your life without the whole table having to be in on that discussion.
Yeah. Yeah. No, and I think that's, whether you're thinking about it that conscious, or if you're just trying to get outside of yourself a little bit more, I think that's always kind of a place, when I was 9 through like 13 playing D&D, I played big guys with swords, or a sneaky guy with, a hood or something like that. And then, I could get to a certain place to where I could explore something different and say, oh, you know what, in real life, I'm kind of shy and quiet. So I'm going to play the opposite. I'm going to play this bard character that's just like in everybody's business, has no problem sitting down at a table with 10 strangers and just talking, right?
It's amazing, right?
Yeah, it is. It is absolutely actually amazing. And like I said, I'm talking even from more of a casual kind of perspective instead of something that, like you're saying, that is, really intentionally directing. It is very powerful. It has a very powerful effect. So I think even doing it more than on a more conscious level, like you're saying, I can definitely see where it could really, really affect the people who are doing it.
I mean, that's my hope, that I can do good for people.
Yeah, absolutely. And now you hinted at some things that you are working on, some projects and things. You mentioned something called Dream Catcher. Why don't you tell us about that?
Well, it's Dream Chaser, and it's an indie game.
Sorry, I apologize.
No problem. It's Dream Chaser. I mean, Dream Catcher is an easy one to go to when you hear the name.
Yeah.
But Dream Chaser is by Pete Petrusha of Imagining Games.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a Kickstarter 4 years ago. And when I first saw the game, the idea of the game is you can have a pre-generated setting like Hong Kong romance or Hong Kong action flick or event romance setting. But really, I love going in without it. You have up to 4 players. And at the beginning of the game, each player gets a bunch of note cards and they write down a goal or a dream, like overthrow the empire, befriend a dragon, live in the woods. And then the group picks one of those to be the central goal for the group. So let's say befriend a dragon. And then they each pick their role, which is like their character class or their playbook. And so someone says, I'm a hunter tracker, so find a dragon. Another one says, I'm a linguist, so we can speak to the dragon. Another one says, I'm an astronaut. Now I, as the game master, know there's an astronaut and a dragon somehow in the same game. Then they choose milestones that along the way would make the game interesting and fun for them. So make a magic sword, find my long lost sister, learn a new language. No one can veto your milestone, but you do work as a group to place them around the central dream. And that becomes the dream map or the map for the game. You move through the milestones until you get to the central core. And as soon as I read about this game, excuse me, as soon as I read about this game, I thought, wow, you could easily make this a central goal be a goal you have in life, right? And the milestones could be steps to get to that goal. So I wrote Pete, and I ended up doing some beta testing for the game and some editing for the book and running it at cons. And over time, Pete would get asked by therapists and social workers, how can I use this with my clients? And he and I talked about spiritual applications. And so he brought me on to lead the creation of a volume on how therapists and spiritual directors and pastoral counselors could use this one-on-one in 60-minute sessions with their clients. And I've been doing that work and that research for a few years now, building community of other professionals who want to use the game. We don't necessarily have a solid publication date set for it yet, but I have played with probably 20 different people using the game to build my foundation for understanding how it works.
No, that's interesting. So that game kind of really leans into some of the stuff that we had been talking about, kind of this collaborative, storytelling, and then really kind of getting at the heart of some things and having people really work together, right?
Very collaborative. As a GM, I don't know what's going to happen until the game starts. And I love that improv nature where I just have to, I played the dragon game, the befriending a dragon one, and I decided to have it happen in 21st century Chicago. And I had to figure out why are there dragons?
Yeah.
And we had a blast unfolding that story.
Yeah, that sounds awesome. And and I just think, like some of those things, I think that's when really creativity just really comes out when, somebody just says befriend a dragon and somebody else says, oh, well, 21st century or something. And you're just like, how do I do this? And that's when the creative, our juices and everything can just like flow and just come together because we just have to think with those kind of limitations and then create a world. And I think it becomes so rich when we do that.
The Live in the Woods game someone suggested that at a game, and I thought, okay, that's not going to go anywhere. I don't see how that could happen. But then I started thinking about it, and I kind of helped the group pick that one. If your dream was to live in the woods, my thought process went, you've never seen a tree. They're only legends. So we created a group that was going to go find the legendary trees. And that was such a fun game.
Yeah. Yeah, that's an awesome idea. I mean, that is an incredible idea because you could say, oh, well, live in the woods. And if you take some, people who are familiar with that, it doesn't seem like there's much of, conflict or story or something there. Because I could live in the woods right now, or something. But like to take it from a people who have never seen a tree, that adds like a mythical, epic quality to the whole story.
They discovered a new continent and new creatures they had never seen before. It was beautiful.
Yeah. That's awesome. And that is just really incredible. And so, a game like that, I think you can definitely take it in a lot of directions. And, maybe, I know we're coming up on time here. But I just had a kind of a random thought. Like I said, I played D&D for a long time. I kind of came up, watched role-playing games evolve, got to kind of the place to where I could play a game that was free form, like Dream Chaser. But do you find that people who have never played before can kind of jump into a game like that? Or do they kind of struggle with the free form? Because I know sometimes I've mentioned to people, I've run a sandbox game where I just say, okay, do something. And people, people who are experienced with role-playing games, they'll just start thinking of crazy stuff. But a new player is like, I don't know. So have you seen like maybe people who've played before are better at those types of games, or people who are new kind of struggle at first?
I've seen the response across the board. Some people just love the openness. Some people need the structure. Some people just resist it until they start. And some of these games have more structure built into them. Like Orbital is a game, no dice, no masters, belonging outside belonging game that offers a really solid structure to scenes. If you had never played before, then you can follow their structure, and it really helps. So it does take a little willingness to step out and say, I'm going to help create this universe instead of the game master telling me everything. Yeah. But so again, I've seen the wide range of responses, and beginners or veterans, doesn't really matter. They all fall into different range of experience there.
Okay. Yeah. No, I can see that. I just thought it was an interesting kind of question to answer, because I know what you mean too, because I've seen people who are used to playing kind of almost a very structured Dungeons and Dragons game, and maybe they've been playing for 20 years and they have a hard time when they're introduced to a kind of more free form game. So it doesn't necessarily mean just because you've played a lot, that you're kind of ready to.
It could be a hindrance.
Yeah, it could in some ways. Yeah, absolutely. Well, Menachem, I've had you on here a long time. I do want to give you a chance, though. Where can people learn more, about your work and learn more about Dream Chaser and some of the other things that you're involved in?
Sure. My website is whatmakesyoucomealive.net. There's a quote from Howard Thurman, who was a minister and a spiritual director to Martin Luther King Jr. and other members of the civil rights era. And this stuff can become the foundation of my work. And he said, don't ask what the world needs. Ask what makes you come alive and go do it. Because what the world needs is people who have come alive. And that's the core of my work, helping people find and manifest what makes them come alive. I also stream fairly regularly now with the CAST gamers, CASTT, the community of applied, spiritual, and therapeutic tabletop gamers. We're on Twitch every Friday night, most Friday nights, And we also have a show called Gays of Our Lives, queer people playing queer games, where we have a rotating cast of people playing games by queer creators and with explicitly queer themes and then discussing them. We play 3 or 4 sessions and then have a debrief session where we talk about the game and what we learned and how we felt about the experience.
Okay. And I will make sure that I will put links to your website and to your streaming into the show notes for this episode at dicegeeks.com. So anybody who is interested can head over there right now and learn more about what you are up to. So Menachem, thank you so much for coming on the show today. It was a pleasure to speak with you.
Well, this was a great conversation. Thank you for having me.
All right, there you have it, guys. I really hope you enjoyed my conversation with Menachem today. As I mentioned in the show, you can find links to Menachem's work in the show notes for this episode at dicegeeks.com. So if you want to learn more about what Menachem is up to, please head over there and check out those links. Okay, if you want some free stuff, head over to dicegeeks.com/free. You'll get 20 free dungeon maps. You'll also get a custom background for D&D 5e. You will also get some other little PDFs that are just bonuses that you will have to find out what they are by heading over to dicegeeks.com/free. You will also never miss an episode of this show. And each and every Friday, you'll get an email update from me letting you know what is going on here in this wild, wild world of Dice Geeks. All right, guys, I thank you so much. You know, it is a privilege to come to you each and every Wednesday with a new fascinating interview. And I thank you so much for listening. So until next time, keep gaming.